Day, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleagues delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. And while this reply stated that it seemed useless to continue the existing diplomatic negotiations, it contained no threat or hint of war or of armed attack. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
At the beginning of the war.
Oh, my name is Pearl Weiss. I was 25 years old when Pearl Harbor was
Bombed? Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm John Weiss, and at that time I must have been about 27.
Okay, the first question, Grandma, where were you and how did you feel when you found out Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
I was at my mother-in-law's house. We were visiting there, and my brother-in-law came in, walked into the room, and said, Pearl Harbor's been bombed. We were sick.
Okay.
Mr. Weiss, do you think the U.S. should have entered the war when they did, or do you think they entered at the right
What?
time? Do you think the U.S. should have entered the war when they did, or do you think they entered at the right time?
Well, I think they did what they had to do. When somebody hauls off and tears you up like that, you gotta fight back. That's the way I look at it. You're not gonna let them shoot our country up or part of it and kill off thousands of our men and get away with it. Sneak attack.
Okay. Grandma, what were some of the most severe hardships you had to face during the war?
Well, generally speaking, I didn't think of the war as a hardship because just before the war there was a Great Depression when people went hungry and went through a terrible lot of hardships, except for people going to war and getting killed. Otherwise, it wasn't such a hardship, except for there was lack of food. Even though you had money, you couldn't buy food. You used rationing stamps, and meat and most food products were very scarce. Even though you had the ration stamps, you didn't get much food. Commodity was hard to come by. I remember an instance when I had company coming, and I didn't have no bath towels to give them. They were all worn out. I wanted to buy some, and I couldn't get any from the department stores. That was common. Not knowing that the war was coming so fast, I would have stocked up, but we didn't know that.
Okay. Mrs. Weiss, being a full-blooded German, did anyone bother you personally during the war?
Not at all. Not at all. Where I lived, there were all kinds of good-natured slurs. As a German, I was called a crowdhead. And the Irish, they had slurs, but it was all in good nature. There was no meanness about it. Today, you would have been called on the carpet for that.
Grandpa, What weapons did you work on during the war?
Mostly,
Where you worked?
well, mostly I worked on bazookas, firing pins for the arsenal, and general war supplies.
Okay.
Mostly the bazookas, or rocket launchers if they want to call them that.
Okay.
Mrs. Vise, do you think victory gardens were a success in helping people have enough food to survive, and why or why not?
Very much so. Because at the start of the war, people hadn't worked long enough to accumulate wages. As I said, we had the Depression. And people would take every plot of land that they could find and plant gardens. And I will say, the children were very healthy from eating all those vegetables.
Okay, this is for both of you. And Grandma, you can go first. Did you know anyone personally who lost their life fighting the war?
Yes, we did. And we were very fortunate to have a lot of John's brothers come back, but there were a lot that lost their lives in our neighborhood. And John had lots of his friends killed in the war. Oh, could I like to inject this? In Waterloo, there were 5 children killed during this war.
Brothers.
There were 5 brothers, and they made a movie of that. Their name was Sullivan, and it was a very interesting movie. Well, after this happened, they made the law that 5 brothers or so many brothers couldn't be on the same carrier or
With the same unity.
in the same unit. That was a law.
Okay.
Up until that.
Well, it was my buddy all the way up. He was married and had 5 kids, and he enlisted. And he got shot down over the English Channel. He was a belly gunner. And they had to unload him at sea after he got shot up. And there was other ones too. I just can't recall all their names right now, but I've lost, 10 or 15 guys I knew and worked with and stuff like that. It's too hard to remember now all their names. I can't even remember names I got worked with in the last few years. That's about all I can think of on that.
Mr. Vise, how do you feel about Hitler's accusations that the Jewish people were the cause of all Germany's problems?
Well, I don't have any feelings one way or the other because I'm not that close in on it.
Excuse me.
You talking about the Jews?
Yes.
Well, they do control, or always did control, a lot of commerce, money in the banks and everything else, business. And when you got that much control, I suppose that people don't like you too well. A lot of them didn't. I mean, I don't know how it ever affected me, except that maybe you couldn't get stuff maybe the way you wanted it because it was controlled. The big money was in the Jewish people, the control of the money.
Grandma, where were you when the war ended?
Oh, I remember that very well. Where the Rock Island Post Office is now, that used to be a park. It was called Spencer Park. And I was sitting there waiting for Grandpa to go to a union meeting. And when he got halfway across the street, I heard everybody screaming and yelling and cars driving through the street. There was no union meeting. That's what happened.
Mrs. Vise, when you look back at the war, was it one of the worst times of your life?
No, now, let me get this straight. I felt a lot of compassion and sadness, but I think I've had things happen just as bad.
Personally.
As far as the war, that part I felt terrible about. But there was another side where really there were happy times then. As the crime, we didn't even lock our doors, and people treated each other better than they do now.
You could walk down the street without getting mugged or stabbed or robbed all the time with something happening.
And you see, there were divorces like there are now.
And most people, raised their kids and looked after them real close, and that's one of the reasons it was the way it was, because they didn't have free reign like a lot of it is now.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Is it all over?
That wasn't so bad.
Gee, that hurt.